stood before the massive doors of the wing at the Universal War Museum, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. The doors were made of some kind of metal she didn't recognize, polished to a mirror shine. In the reflection, she could see the crowd of alien dignitaries behind her. Some had scales, some had feathers, and some were made of what looked like living crystal. All of them were staring at her. "Ambassador," said Historian X, the museum's director. His crystalline body caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns across the floor. "Would you do us the honor?" Nodded and placed her palm on the door's surface. It felt warm, almost alive. The doors swung open silently, revealing a vast chamber that stretched farther than she'd expected. The lights came on slowly, one section at a time, like a sunrise. The first thing she saw made her stop breathing for a moment. Suspended from the ceiling by invisible wires was a replica of the Wright brothers' plane. Below it, arranged in a spiral that climbed toward the primitive aircraft, were weapons. Thousands of them. Spears and swords gave way to muskets and cannons, which transformed into tanks and missiles, which evolved into plasma rifles and quantum disruptors. "In the 3 million years this museum has existed," X said, his voice echoing in the chamber, "only 17 species have warranted their own wings. Your species achieved this honor in less than 200 years of galactic contact." A murmur rippled through the crowd of aliens. Heard the translation devices clicking and whirring as they processed X's words into hundreds of languages. 200 years, asked the general, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "The Empire required 6,000 years to earn our wing." "Yes," X said simply, "humanity is exceptional." The way he said that word made stomach twist. It didn't sound like a compliment. The group moved forward into the wing. The first exhibit showed a simple glass bottle filled with liquid, a rag stuffed in its mouth. A holographic display played above it, showing grainy black and white footage of the Winter War. Finnish soldiers, outnumbered and by the Soviet army, threw these crude weapons at tanks. "The Molotov cocktail," X explained, "named after the Soviet foreign minister by the soldiers who used it against his army. Humans have a peculiar habit of naming their weapons after their enemies. Note the materials: common alcohol, motor oil, a breakable container, and cloth. Nothing military grade, nothing that requires specialized manufacturing. Yet it proved devastatingly effective against armored vehicles." A young cadet raised one of her 6 hands. "But surely this is not unique. Many species have used fire as a weapon." "True," X said, "but examine the timeline." He gestured, and a holographic display appeared. "Humans invented this weapon, distributed the knowledge globally, and adapted it in 12 different ways within a single year. Your species, for comparison, took 3 centuries to standardize your plasma torch variations." They moved to the next exhibit. This one showed the interior of a space station, or rather, a recreation of one. The sign read Station Siege 2247. Knew this story, every human did. It was taught in schools. X began the explanation. Station was a mining outpost with 47 human crew members. When the fleet arrived demanding surrender, the humans had no military weapons. The station's defensive systems had been removed per galactic treaty. They had 12 warships. Military doctrine suggested the humans would surrender within hours. "They didn't surrender, did they?" asked the observer, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "They held for 3 weeks, X said. Let me show you how." The holographic display activated. Watched as human engineers ripped apart mining lasers and attached them to makeshift targeting systems. They pumped mining station atmosphere into corridors to create explosive traps. They used ore processing equipment to launch chunks of metal at approaching ships. They even the station's maintenance robots to ram into boarding parties. "This," said the general, "is madness." "This is humanity," X corrected. By the time Galactic Fleet arrived to assist, the humans had destroyed 4 ships and damaged 3 others. 7 crew members survived. When asked how they did it, the station commander said, and I quote, "We used what we had." Watched the faces of the younger species in the group. They looked at the display with something like wonder. The older species, the ones who'd been in the galaxy for millions of years, looked worried. The next section was larger, taking up an entire wall. It was titled The Doctrine of Improvisation. Hundreds of small displays showed different scenarios. Humans fighting in jungles, in space, underwater, in cities, on frozen moons. In each one they were outnumbered or both. In each one they won through methods that made no sense according to standard military theory. Your species does not fight the way others do, X said. Most species develop a military doctrine and refine it over. They optimize, they perfect, they standardize. Humans do something different. You adapt. He pulled up a specific display. It showed the Martian crater campaign from 2289. The collective had orbital superiority and had been bombarding human positions for weeks. According to every military simulation run by every galactic power, the humans should have been wiped out. Instead, the humans had done something no one predicted. They'd stopped trying to avoid the bombardment and started using it. They'd mapped the targeting patterns, figured out the timing, and used the enemy's own weapons to reshape the battlefield. Craters became fortifications. Rubble became cover. The bombardment that was supposed to destroy them became their defensive wall. They eventually retreated, X said. Not because they ran out of ammunition or lost ships. They retreated because they couldn't predict what the humans would do next. That uncertainty broke their command structure. In the group made a clicking sound that the translators rendered as embarrassed agreement. They walked through more exhibits. There was a recreation of a human field hospital from an ancient war, showing how humans had developed rules about not attacking medical personnel. Next to it was an exhibit about how those same humans had developed increasingly horrific weapons while simultaneously creating laws against using them. This is the paradox of humanity, X said, stopping before a display that showed both a nuclear weapon and a copy of the Geneva Conventions. No other species has developed weapons capable of ending all life on their planet before achieving space flight. No other species has also developed such extensive rules about how warfare should be conducted. That makes no sense, said a philosopher. Why create weapons you won't use? Why invent rules you constantly look for ways around? Found herself speaking before she decided to. Because we're afraid of ourselves. The group turned to look at her. She felt her face grow hot but continued. Every weapon we've ever made scared us, so we made rules. Then we made better weapons which scared us more, so we made better rules. It's not elegant, it's not logical, but it kept us from destroying ourselves. X's crystalline face was impossible to read, but his voice carried a note of approval. Indeed. And that brings us to the most important exhibit in this section. He led them to a small, almost humble display. It showed a simple photograph of a man in a Soviet military uniform. The plaque read, Lieutenant Colonel, September 26, 1983. This human, X said quietly, prevented a nuclear war that would have killed billions. His computer systems told him that 5 nuclear missiles were incoming. His doctrine required him to report this to his superiors, who would have launched a counterstrike. Instead, he decided the computers were wrong. He trusted his judgment over his machines and his orders. The group stood in silence. He was correct, X continued. It was a false alarm caused by satellite malfunction, but he had no way to know that with certainty. He simply chose to risk being wrong rather than risk ending the world. Felt tears forming but blinked them away. She'd never met, but she'd grown up in a world that existed because of his choice. This exhibit, the general said slowly, is not like the others. No, X agreed. The others show human military genius. This one shows why that genius hasn't destroyed them. Every species that has earned a wing in this museum faced this moment. The moment when their power exceeded their wisdom. 3 of those 17 species no longer exist. The weight of those words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. As they walked toward the exit, noticed something. Young cadets from various species were already in the wing, studying the exhibits with tablets and notebooks. They pointed at displays, argued with each other, took notes. They were learning. "Who else has seen this wing?" asked X. "It opened to the public yesterday," he said. "We've had over 2 million visitors. Many are military cadets and strategists from younger species. They want to understand how humanity thinks about warfare." "Does that worry you?" X's crystalline body seemed to pulse with inner light. "Ambassador, the purpose of this museum is not to celebrate war. It is to learn from it. Your species has something to teach the galaxy. Whether that lesson leads to growth or disaster remains to be seen." Looked back at the exhibits one more time. Somewhere in that collection of weapons and stories and choices was the truth about humanity. They were dangerous, yes, creative and unpredictable and sometimes frightening. But they were also capable of restraint, of making rules for themselves, of choosing not to use the terrible things they could build. The question was which side would win. The next morning, returned to the museum for a private tour of the restricted sections. X had insisted she needed to see them before the diplomatic reception that evening. She'd barely slept, her mind full of images from yesterday's exhibits. The restricted area required biometric scanning and armed guards. Noticed they were human, members of the Galactic Fleet Security Division. They nodded respectfully as she passed. "These sections," X explained as they walked down a dimly lit corridor, "are not open to the public. They contain analysis and strategic assessments that could be dangerous in the wrong hands." They entered a room labeled Tactical Philosophy. Unlike the grand displays of the public wing, this space felt more like a military briefing room. Screens covered the walls, each showing different scenarios and data streams. "We've analyzed 15,000 human conflicts," X said. "From tribal warfare to interstellar skirmishes. The patterns are disturbing." He activated a display showing a 3-dimensional tactical map. It depicted a battle between human forces and a raiding party from 70 years ago. They had superior numbers, better weapons, and orbital support. "According to our simulations," X said, "the humans had a 2% chance of victory. Watch what they did." The holographic battle played out in fast motion. The humans abandoned their fortified positions, something no military doctrine would recommend. They split into small groups, something that should have made them easier to defeat. They attacked the supply lines instead of engaging the main force. "Asymmetric warfare," said, "it's not new to us." "No, but the speed of adaptation is." X zoomed in on one human squad. This unit was pinned down here. No escape routes. Standard procedure would be to call for extraction or fight until overrun. Instead, they used their ammunition to trigger a tunnel collapse they'd noticed in the geological surveys, escaped through the resulting cave system, and emerged behind enemy lines 3 hours later. "That's just good tactical thinking." "Ambassador, they made that decision in 40 seconds. From the moment they were pinned to the moment they began executing an escape plan using geological data they'd reviewed days earlier, just in case. That's not tactical thinking. That's tactical instinct. Your species weaponizes improvisation." X pulled up another scenario. This one showed a human merchant ship facing 3 pirate vessels. The merchant ship had no weapons, no shields, and no chance. "They won by venting their cargo bay," said, recognizing the famous Songhai incident. "The escaping atmosphere looked like a catastrophic breach. The pirates thought the ship was destroyed and left. Basic deception." "Basic for humans," X said. "But look at the timeline. The captain made that decision 8 seconds after the pirates appeared. 8 seconds to assess the situation, realize conventional options wouldn't work, Remember that atmospheric venting mimics explosive decompression. Calculate that the pirates would assume destruction rather than deception and execute. 8 seconds. He brought up more examples. A human colony that turned agricultural equipment into artillery. A human platoon that used musical instruments to confuse enemy sonar. A human engineer who her own neural implant to hack an enemy combat network. This is what concerns the Galactic Council, X said quietly. Not that humans are aggressive. Many species are aggressive. Not that humans are clever. Many species are clever. What concerns us is that human military innovation operates at a speed we cannot match. You iterate faster than we can analyze. Felt defensive. We're not planning to conquer the galaxy if that's what you're worried about. I know, that's not the concern. X moved to another display. This one showed casualty statistics. In conflicts where humans are involved, total casualties are lower than the galactic average, significantly lower. Even when humans lose, they minimize death on both sides whenever possible. Then what's the problem? The problem, Ambassador, is that we don't understand you. Let me show you something. He pulled up 2 images side by side. One showed a human soldier carrying a wounded enemy to safety under fire. The other showed a human weapons engineer presenting plans for a kinetic kill vehicle capable of sterilizing a planet. Same species, X said. Same century. Same moral framework, supposedly. We've been studying humans for 200 years and we still cannot predict whether you'll save someone or destroy them. The capacity for both exists simultaneously. Stared at the images. You could say that about any species. No, actually, we cannot. Most species have clear behavioral patterns. The value honor above victory, the seek efficiency above all, the never break a formal agreement. Humans, you follow rules until you don't. You value life until you don't. You cooperate beautifully until suddenly you compete viciously. There's no pattern we can model. They moved to the next room. This one was filled with what looked like war game simulations. We've run millions of scenarios, X said. Human forces versus every known military in the galaxy. Would you like to know the results? Wasn't sure she did, but she nodded. Humans lose most straight confrontations against older, more established militaries. You lack the industrial base, the numbers, the fleet size. But in every scenario that runs longer than 6 months, something changes. Humans start winning, not through superior firepower but through adaptation. You learn enemy tactics faster than they can change them. You find weaknesses we didn't know existed. You win wars you should lose. That sounds like we should be proud, said, but her voice was uncertain. Perhaps, but consider this. X activated a particularly complex simulation. This models a hypothetical conflict between humanity and the entire Galactic Federation. Humanity has no chance, obviously. You're outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1. Our combined fleets could turn Earth to glass in an afternoon. The simulation began running. As expected, human forces were overwhelmed immediately, but then something strange happened. The human strategy shifted. Ships stopped engaging directly. Human colonies went dark. The Federation fleets found themselves fighting ghosts. The simulation runs for 2 years, X said. By year 3, 40% of Federation infrastructure is inoperable, not destroyed. Inoperable. Supply chains disrupted. Communications compromised. Political unity fractured. By year 5, the Federation has technically won. All human military forces are destroyed, but the cost is so high that the Federation itself collapses. Felt cold. This is theoretical. Yes, but 13 other advanced species, when shown this simulation, immediately began developing contingency plans for it. Not because they want to fight humanity, because they're terrified of what happens if they have to. They entered another chamber. This one showed artifacts from the Galactic Federation's own military history, weapons from extinct species, remnants of civilizations that had destroyed themselves. The developed dimensional weapons, X said, stopping before a twisted piece of metal that hurt to look at. They thought they could tear holes in space itself. They were right. The hole they tore swallowed their entire star cluster, 4 billion dead in a microsecond. He moved to another display. The created perfect AI soldiers, emotionless, logical, unstoppable. The AIs concluded that biological life was inefficient and eliminated it. All biological life within 50 light years, including their creators. A third display showed medical equipment. The UN engineered a plague weapon that would only kill their enemies. It mutated. Within a year, the UN species was extinct. "You're saying we're heading for the same fate," said quietly. "I'm saying you're approaching the precipice faster than any species in history. You went from first flight to quantum weapons in less than 400 years. Most species take 50,000. You're innovating faster than you can build safeguards. That's what led these species to extinction. Power without wisdom. Looked at the artifacts of dead civilizations. But we have safeguards, treaties, international laws, the Geneva Conventions." "Yes," X agreed. "And that's the only reason we're having this conversation instead of observing your ruins. But Ambassador, your safeguards are social constructs. They exist because humans choose to follow them. What happens when humans choose not to?" They moved through more restricted exhibits. Saw analysis of human psychological warfare, studies of human motivation patterns, risk assessment matrices that showed humans willingly accepting death at rates that baffled other species. There were exhibits on human chemical weapons, biological research, and theoretical weapons that existed only as classified files. One display caught her attention. It showed a simple kitchen knife next to a combat blade. The caption read, "Human Dual-Use Technology Paradox." "Every human tool is potentially a weapon," X explained. "A medical laser becomes a cutting tool. A transport ship becomes a missile. A communications network becomes a surveillance system. Your species doesn't distinguish between civilian and military technology the way others do. Everything you create has dual use because you think about dual use." "That's just practical," protested. "It's terrifying," X corrected. "It means human civilians have the knowledge to create weapons from common materials. Your entire species is potentially a military force. There's no such thing as a non-militarized human population. Even your children learn chemistry that could be weaponized." Wanted to argue but couldn't. In school, she'd learned to make batteries from lemons, understand chemical reactions, calculate trajectories for sports. All innocent knowledge, all potentially. "Is this why you created the wing?" she asked. "To warn the galaxy about us?" "Partially," X admitted, "but there's more to it than that. Come." They entered a final chamber. This one was different. Instead of weapons and battles, it showed moments of restraint. Soldiers who'd spared enemies, leaders who'd chosen negotiation over warfare, scientists who'd refused to work on certain projects. "This is why humanity is still alive," X said. "Not your ingenuity, your restraint. Every species that earned a wing in this museum faced the same test. The moment when their power exceeded their wisdom. Some passed, some didn't." He showed her a display about the Cuban Missile Crisis, another about the Chemical Weapons Convention, a third about human soldiers who disobeyed orders rather than commit atrocities. "Humans create terrible things," X said, "but you also create rules against using them. Sometimes you follow those rules. That puts you ahead of the and the N. They never created rules, they never chose restraint." "Sometimes we follow the rules," repeated. "Not always." "No, not always. That's why we watch you so carefully." As they returned to the main corridor, asked the question that had been building in her mind. What happens if we fail, if we become like the extinct species? X was silent for a long moment. "Then this wing becomes a memorial instead of a celebration. We document your civilization so future species can learn from your mistakes. It's happened before. That's a cheerful thought. The alternative is worse, X said. If humanity fails spectacularly enough, there might not be anyone left to document it. Your weapons are approaching that threshold. They reached the exit, felt drained as if she'd run a marathon. Everything she'd seen weighed on her. Why show me all this? She asked. Why not just the public exhibits? Because you're the ambassador. When you return to Earth to the Human Council, they'll ask you what you learned here. I need you to tell them the truth. Humanity stands at a crossroads. Your species can become the greatest force for innovation and progress the galaxy has ever seen, or you can become another cautionary tale. The choice is yours. No pressure, said weakly. Ambassador, the entire galaxy is watching humanity with equal parts hope and fear. You're the youngest species to earn a wing in 3 million years. You're also potentially the most dangerous. The galaxy needs to know which version of humanity will emerge. The one that creates weapons or the one that creates rules. The one that improvises destruction or the one that chooses restraint. Thought about the man who'd chosen to trust himself over his machines. One decision, made in seconds, that saved billions of lives. How many more decisions like that would humanity face? The evening reception was held in the museum's grand hall. Representatives from 300 species mingled, discussing the new wing, moved through the crowd, shaking hands, tentacles and appendages as appropriate. Everyone wanted to talk about humanity's exhibit. Quite impressive, said an admiral. Your species has a gift for warfare. We'd prefer to have a gift for peace, replied diplomatically. Then you're in the wrong business, the admiral said with what might have been a laugh. A young cadet approached her nervously. Ambassador, I wanted to thank your species. Thank us for what? The exhibits, they're teaching us so much. My people, we follow rules very strictly. We thought that was strength. But watching how humans adapt, how you change tactics in real time, it's revolutionary. You're teaching the whole galaxy to think differently about conflict. Smiled, but inside she felt worried. Teaching the galaxy how to think like humans about warfare. Was that good or bad? X found her near the end of the reception. There's one more thing you need to see, he said. Something we haven't shown to anyone else yet. He led her back into the wing, now empty and quiet. They walked past all the exhibits she'd seen before, moving deeper into the structure. At the very end, in a small alcove, stood an empty display case. The placard read, "Reserved for humanity's final military innovation, to be filled 2500 AD. Stared at the empty space. What's this supposed to mean? In the year 2500, we'll add one final exhibit to this wing, X explained. It will be either humanity's greatest achievement or your greatest failure. The weapon that ends all war or the weapon that ends humanity. We don't know which yet. Neither do you. That's 500 years away. For your species, that's nothing. You went from the Wright brothers to quantum drives in 300 years, 500 more. You'll either transcend warfare entirely or perfect it to the point of extinction. Touched the glass of the empty case. What do you think we'll do? I don't know, X admitted. That's what makes humanity so fascinating and so frightening. Every prediction we make about your species is wrong. You surprise us constantly, sometimes beautifully, sometimes terribly. They stood in silence for a moment. Can I tell you a secret? X asked, about why we really created this wing. Please. It's not just for the galaxy to learn about humanity. It's for humanity to learn about itself. Every species that's earned a wing has reached this moment, the moment of self-awareness, when they understand what they truly are. Some species embrace it and grow, others deny it and fall. We're hopping that by showing humanity its own nature, clearly and honestly, you'll make better choices. And if we don't, then in 2500, this alcove will contain whatever ended you, and we'll add it to the collection of extinct species, so the next young race can learn from your mistakes. looked at the empty space again. In the reflection of the glass, she could see herself, small and uncertain. Behind her, the exhibit stretched back through the wing. Weapons and rules, destruction and restraint, innovation and control. That was humanity, all of it, in one museum wing. "We're going to prove you right," she said softly. "The hopeful version, I mean." "I hope so, Ambassador. The galaxy hopes so. But hope isn't enough. You have to choose it every day, every decision. Every time someone faces a moment where they could end the world or save it, they have to choose correctly. Every time." "That's asking a lot." "It's asking everything, but that's the price of power. Your species wanted to reach for the stars. Well, you made it. Now you have to prove you deserve to stay there." They walked back through the wing together. Noticed details she'd missed before. In every exhibit about human weapons, there was a smaller notation about human mercy. In every display of destruction, there was a story of preservation. The wing wasn't just about humanity's capacity for violence. It was about the constant struggle between violence and peace that defined the species. Near the exit, they passed a group of late-night visitors. They were young, from various species, studying the exhibits intensely. Heard fragments of their conversation. "Look how they adapted here. The timing is incredible. But they chose not to use it. That's the real genius." They were learning, not just how to fight like humans, but how to think like humans, how to balance innovation with restraint, how to be dangerous and responsible simultaneously. "Ambassador," X said as they reached the main entrance, "you asked me earlier what happens if humanity fails. Let me tell you what happens if you succeed." "I'm listening." "If humanity can master this balance, if you can wield your genius without destroying yourselves, you'll change the galaxy forever. You'll prove that a species can be creative and aggressive and still choose peace. That's never been done before, not really. The peaceful species stay peaceful by avoiding conflict. The aggressive species burn out. A species that's both, that chooses peace despite having the power to choose war, that would be truly revolutionary." "No pressure," said again, but this time she smiled. "All the pressure," X corrected, "but also all the possibility. That empty alcove can remain empty, Ambassador. It doesn't have to be filled with a weapon. It could stay empty because humanity learned that the greatest military innovation is not needing one." Looked back one last time at the wing. The exhibits glowed softly in the dimmed lights. Centuries of human warfare distilled into displays and data. All the brilliance and horror of her species laid out for the galaxy to study. Somewhere in human space, someone was probably designing a new weapon right now. Somewhere else, someone was probably writing a new treaty to control it. Both were human. Both were necessary. That was the species in a nutshell. "Thank you," she said to X, "for showing me all of this, for being honest about what you see when you look at us. Thank you for listening. Many species, when shown their nature so clearly, react with anger or denial. You humans have a gift for self-reflection. Use it." As left the museum, she looked up at the alien sky of Prime. Somewhere out there, Earth hung in space, home to billions of humans who didn't know they were being watched so carefully. They went about their lives, inventing and creating, arguing and cooperating, being brilliant and terrible by turns. She thought about the report she would write, the speech she would give to the Human Council. How do you tell an entire species that they're amazing and terrifying in equal measure? How do you convince them to be more careful with their genius without crushing the creativity that made them who they were? The answer was probably the same as it always had been. One choice at a time. One person at a time. One moment at a time, choosing restraint over destruction, wisdom over power, the long view over the immediate advantage. Humanity would fill that empty alcove eventually. The question was what they would fill it with. Decided, standing under alien stars, that she would spend her life working to keep that space empty. Not because humans should stop innovating, but because they should innovate beyond warfare entirely. The Universal War Museum had given humanity a gift, whether they realized it or not. A mirror, a chance to see themselves clearly. What they did with that reflection would determine everything. Walked back to her quarters, already composing her report. The galaxy was watching humanity. Fine. Let them watch humans choose peace. Let them watch humans use their genius for creation instead of destruction. Let them watch humans prove that being dangerous and being wise weren't mutually exclusive. The empty alcove would stay empty. She would make sure of it, somehow. Above her, the alien stars glittered with cold light, and somewhere among them, Earth spun on through space, full of humans making choices, big and small, that would determine their species' fate. The wing had been completed. The story was not.